Okay, welcome back to the channels and welcome to the new training series that I'm putting together, which is all about 100 miles. And we're going to basically talk a lot about the GB Ultras 100 mile race series. Hopefully they'll be back next year. So just like on my 50 mile ultra running series, I talked a little bit about training and base training on the first video, and then I started to break down each individual race on separate videos, and I'm going to try and do exactly the same format. I'm not going to change that. I think it works, and then that way I can give you a bit more of a training specific for each one of those events. 100 mile races, absolutely love them. I think they are, you know, what people aim for as an ultra runner. Once they've done a few 50s. The reason why I love it so much, I think 100 miles is a bit more tactics involved. Obviously you've got a little bit more night stuff going in there, you've got daytime, you've got to get your nutrition spot on. Yeah, there's a lot more admin involved, so I just think there's a lot more to it than just running out for the 50 miles. I think you've really got to put your thinking cap on, and I love doing the planning side of things as well, leading up to events. So for me, 100 miles is what I say enjoy the most out of ultra running. So back in the Ultra 50 mile series, we talked about can we just jump straight into 50 miles, and I said yeah, probably. You don't have to do a marathon beforehand, for example, but when you come to 100 miles, I think you really want to get a few 50 miles under your belt, especially over different types of terrain. Learn mistakes in your 50 miles, so when you do your hundreds, you already sort of got the basics correct. There's things definitely going to happen 100 miles. I think it's near enough impossible to have a whole 100-mile race feeling positive and feeling good all the time. There's going to be definitely some low points in there, but on a 50 mile you might get one, you might not, but I think on a 50 mile you need to learn the basics, just getting ready for like kit checks, what kit to carry, water, change of shoes, just basic stuff on an ultra marathon. You can learn on a 50 mile leading you up to 100. If you try and do an 100 mile for your first race or leading up to it and things go wrong, you might not necessarily have the skill set to get yourselves ready and actually get over that 100 miles. So yeah, definitely think you need to get some 50 miles underneath your belt before you do 100. So we talked a little bit about on the 50 mile about base training. Obviously base training back then, if you want to know what that is, go and check those videos out. For 100 miles, it's not as crazy as people think. Remember, base training is a level of fitness, what I say is what a ultra runner would do in an off season if they were focusing on 100 miles for one event. And then what you do is once you've got that base there, when we look at the individual races, then we start training on that type of terrain for that event and so on. So base training for 100 miles, for me, I think you've got to be running 5 days a week for definite. You need to be getting up there maybe 50 miles per week, or that's maybe 6, 7 to 10 hours of training per week has got to be in there to get your legs used to being on them all the time, basically. But it's not something you can do on 3 runs per week. You can do it. Obviously, there's going to be people out there that can just go out and say, I've run 3 times a week and I can do 100 miles. But what I've always said is if you can get a decent amount of training in, you're not only got to look about how you're going to get on during the event, and you know, you obviously everyone wants to suffer less during these 100-mile events, but you also got to look at your recovery afterwards. If you've done the event and you're crippled for, you know, a month to 2 months afterwards, we've all got lives, we've all got to go back to work. So the more training we can get involved now before the 100-mile event, we're going to recover a lot quicker after that event, and obviously get back to our normal lives, and then look for the next 100-mile event and off we go. Especially if you're doing like the GB Ultras 100-mile Grand Slam, for example. You know, there isn't tons of time to recover and get ready and train for the next event, so you want to be getting a good recovery in. So yeah, that's what I say for base training. 5 runs a week, definite. Maybe that's 6, 7, 10 hours per training per week if you can get up there round that 50-mile mark. And this is not looking at elevation yet. So elevation, you know, you're going to keep that down flat at the moment. We're going to get you up to that mileage, that time on your feet, those many runs per week. And then when you look at your event that you want to do, that's when you're going to start looking at elevation and the type of terrain and all that. So again, once we get to those individual videos, I'll break those down and how you would train for those by adding in vert and adding in the type of terrain and maybe even more distance and more time on your feet if it needs it. Basically on 100 miles, even though when you've got that base training there, things you can start to practice. I find most 100 miles is all about personal admin, sorting your feet out quickly, change kit, carrying more kit. So all this thing needs to be in your base training. If you can't get most people drop out 100-mile races because of poor admin sometimes. So feet are really, really sore, backs, things are rubbing, chafing, niggles. Your base training, you want to be able to run 5 runs per week, like I said, with that base training with no niggles. You don't want to get any upsets, and that's base training. So things you can also do in your base training is, like I said, you need to be match experts on your feet, the shoes that you're going to be wearing, and also can you sort your feet out if they start to get a little bit sore and react quick enough. Chafing should be sorted out by now. You should know what kit doesn't cause it or what you need to put on you to fix that. What kit to carry, basic 50 mile. Obviously for 100 you're going to be carrying more. Sometimes there obviously is a drop bag at certain points, maybe normally at the halfway of a 100-mile event, but that normally all you're doing then is turning that into your night gear from your day gear. So you still need to be used to carrying certain kits. You need to be practicing things like your head torches. Are the head torch that you're going to be using suitable? There's all these little things that you can start to practice in your base training, ready for the big events. So a lot of personal admin should all really be a skill set from your 50 milers, but in your base training, like I said, you want to be carrying that kit. Next big area is nutrition. On a 50 mile, hopefully you started to get an idea what foods agree with you, what works for you and what doesn't. On a 100-mile event, you might need to have a few strategies. So the strategy that you use for over 50 miles might work. For example, I'm very gel orientated, so I can take gels and I'll be absolutely fine with that for a 50 miler. But a 100 miler, taking gels for 12 to whatever hours of running, I'm going to eventually feel like I'm going to get sick and my body's not going to be happy with those sugars and all that going in. So I'm going to need to find different types of foods that's going to help me, support me get over that event. So again, we've got to if you get the basics right, all you've got to do is find out another scenario to get you up there, because when you're having those low points as well, when you're starting to feel ill, you might not feel hungry, or might not feel like you want to eat the foods that you would normally train with. So if you've got a backup plan, another path, if you like, of nutrition you can go to, you definitely want to have a plan B on that as well. So again, and that's something you can practice in your on your long runs in your week as well. So going into your training per week, and obviously I've mentioned already about base training. Now people are going to be wondering, what's your longest run? So on a 50 mile, I talked about your longest run really doesn't want to be any more than 20 miles. Or any more than that 2 to 3 hours. I stand by that on a 100-mile event. I don't see any point of going over that 20-mile point or over the three hours of running, 4 at a push really, 3 hours max really for me. Just because it beats you up so much, it's going to affect another week's worth of training. So me personally, my longest run 6:20, but somewhere else in the week I might add another extended long run as well. So depending on what your weekly mileage is, there's no reason why you can't do a long run on a Saturday, and then on the Wednesday before it, for example, you've done maybe a 10 to 15 mile run. There's no harm in that, and then you've got your little smaller runs in there that are recovery runs. Obviously back-to-back runs are going to come back, so you've been doing those potentially in your 50 miles training to get yourself used to it, especially depending on what event you're doing. They're definitely going to be there on a 100-mile training program, even in your base training. Sorry, can't do that anymore, can you, because of COVID? Everyone's going to start panicking now in the screen. Don't worry, you can't go through the screen. I haven't got COVID either. Anyway, so yeah, back-to-back runs. Now again, your training plans are still 4 weeks long. I don't change that from my 50-mile scenario. So remember, 3 weeks of training with a goal setting. 4th week is your recovery week. I probably plan one back-to-back run in that training block. So you can say every 4 weeks I do a back-to-back run. And again, I'm slowly adding that on, and that distance increase as I go along. So eventually on peak week, you might find you're doing 20 out 20 miles and a 15 mile a day after. It really doesn't matter. You know, all the idea of back-to-back runs is just getting used to your running on tired legs, and hopefully getting your mindset trained ready for the 100 mile as well. So again, you know, for 100 miles, again, it's all mental side of things as well. Can you find a way when you're feeling really low to swap it around and get yourself back into it? Yeah, so that's basically the training that I recommend, really, just for base training. So this is not even looking at event, this is just normal. Other things to talk about on a 100 mile, I mentioned a little bit briefly on mental training, if you like. You're going to suffer at some points. You're out for a long time, especially night time and those early hours in the morning when things start to get cold. You're low. You're sort of, maybe not been eating right. You've had a few low points. You've got to get yourself in a position where you can really test yourself and go, no, I'm not going to give up. And I'm going to do anything else to get across that finish line. Obviously, if you're injured, that's different. But you're going to get them, and you need to find tactics. It doesn't matter what checkpoint staff says to you. It doesn't always work. You need to be able to find it within yourself how you're going to get yourself out of it. And hopefully, by that point anyway, you will know that these low points don't last for very long. They might feel like they do, but there is a way to recover and how to get out of it. I know for me, when I'm a little bit low in a run, it might be because I haven't eaten correctly. So I'll know and test different foods, improve on that, and then about maybe half an hour to 40 minutes, which might feel like the longest point in my life, but we'll get to that point. I'm starting to feel better. I'm starting to run again, and I found my way of getting me out of those low points. Yeah, 100 miles, absolutely love them. And I don't think there's anything else in there that I want to add into base training, really. Some people might ask, you know, what's a good 100 mile event to start with? I don't think it really matters, because it does when you're doing a 50, because it's such a big extreme from one thing to another. So if you've been doing 10Ks, half marathon, marathons, and go, right, okay, now I want to do a 50 mile. But on a 100 mile, you've already learned a hell of a lot from 50. So I wouldn't be worried about jumping into something scary. I really wouldn't. Yeah, there isn't really a good first race. Obviously, with the GB Ultras Grand Slam, you know, you're going to be starting at the beginning, and as we know with GB Ultra stuff, it starts off pretty comfortable races, and then they get harder as the weeks go by, especially leading up to Snowdon, for example. But yeah, you can pretty much jump into any event straight away as long as you're getting the training right and you're being consistent. Obviously, when you've been training for 50 miles, you know, again, if you haven't seen those videos yet, watch those, because there's probably a lot of the basic stuff I've covered in that you'll carry over to the advanced stuff. So, for example, how many miles per week should I increase per week, time, and so on. The principles are the same. You're just extending a little bit further into a 100 mile event or a 100 mile training plan. So watch those videos if you haven't done so far. That'll help you, give you the basics how to build that program. That's it. So next video that I'm going to do, try and get it out next week, is looking straight at the beginning of GB Ultras races and go, right, okay, what's the first 100 miler, which I think is Chester. Yeah, I think it's Chester. And show you how to train for that, how I build a training program based on that event, and then go through them all, just like I did before. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Thank you so much for the likes and subscribes that you've done so far, and I'm glad you're enjoying the videos, and yeah, give me a like and subscribe so I can keep pushing out these videos. Thanks, everyone. Speak to you soon.